Director of Ceremonies, good evening, fellow Namibians, dear mourners. Usually, those who know me, I speak without notes. But today, to give respect Dr. Geingob should get from all of us, and not to spoil such an occasion, I prepared notes so that I make sure I say nothing but what reflects Dr. Hage's life. Before I start with my tribute, I want to preface it with, I want to preface my tribute with something that is usually ignored when we speak about achievements and accomplishments by Dr. Geingob in this country, both before and after independence. Many times we look at his achievement in material and economic terms and in political sense in this country. But there is a bigger picture that involves the massive legislative and constitutional agenda he drove after independence to dismantle policies and practices of apartheid in this country. So when he speaks of institutions, systems, and processes, I want to start with capturing, first, what our courts have said on the constitutional architecture Dr. Hage crafted as the chief architect of our constitution in Namibia. At one point, our Supreme Court, speaking of our electoral system, stated that it is through the electoral process that policies of government are shaped, endorsed or rejected, that political representation in constitutional structures of governments are reaffirmed or rearranged, and that the will of the people is demonstratively expressed and credibly ascertained. That is the electoral system Dr. Hage envisioned for our country, and that is what keeping us. At another occasion, the Supreme Court again, speaking of sacrifices that Dr. Hage and others made, had this to say: the cost of victory measured in human lives, suffering, endurance, and endeavor was immeasurable. Determined that the right which they have gained as individuals and as a people should be preserved and protected for themselves and their children. Namibian resolved that it could be done mostly effectively in a democratic society where the government is responsible to freely elected representatives of the people, operating under a sovereign constitution and a free and independent judiciary. Hage's, may I say, as he is fondly known, had his fingerprint on all this. Now, to President Hage's beloved entire family and Madam Monica Geingob, we are here to mourn and remember the precious moment we shared with a distinguished freedom fighter an icon of Namibian liberation struggle, a man who, to all of us, embodied so many but good aspirations, values, and norms for our nation. Hage is unquestionably a public servant of excellent skills in public administration. We know that. A gift he was to our nation. Hage's legacy of constitutional democracy, peace, unity, and reconciliation, seen in action for the benefit of all Namibian people through constitutional and statutory systems, institutions, and processes he helped establish, is evident, and I'm talking about his legacy, is evident from our constitutional preamble he crafted, amongst other to the effect that our nation, having emerged victorious in its struggle against colonialism, racism, and apartheid, is required to strengthen its resolve not only to cherish, but, dear mourners, to protect the gains of our long struggle for independence. This could never have been achieved, dear mourners, had President Hage and, of course, others, not created a constitutional framework conducive for a country which, in the past, in monumental proportions, suffered pernicious effect of apartheid, to grow and to develop in a political atmosphere of peace and unity. We have to credit, in some great measures, all this to Hage, dear mourners. Hage, our chief constitutional architect, speaks and will continue speaking past this mourning period through our constitution that we as a nation should have a desire and determination to promote amongst all of us the dignity, unity, integrity of the Namibian nation internally and in its relations and association with the outside world. Again, Hage, and I say so with greatest respect too. We know how he liked to be called Hage, how humble he was. As our chief constitutional architect, he ensured that there is a specific obligatory duty on us to achieve, maintain national reconciliation. And by the way, we must not simply reconcile during mourning periods. It must be seen every time, during election, during other periods. It is saddening to be reconciling and being united only during mourning periods. And at all points to foster peace, unity, and common loyalty to a single state. He also abhorred and disliked tribalism, we all know. In fact, he was tribal neutral. Tribal neutral he was, we know. He hated those who engaged and actually traded in tribal arrogance and dominance. He hated them. Just as he hated those who used tribal victimization for cheap political theatrics. We know that. He wanted a nation in which its sons and daughters relate without tribal impediments of consideration for the unity of purpose and harmonious coexistence. He said this until few days before his departure. Those who know Hage, dear mourners, know that he could never have failed to ensure that our Constitution reminds us, members of the executive, rather, to remain vigilant so as to ensure that the scourges of apartheid, tribalism, colonialism do not again manifest themselves in any form in our free and independent Namibia. And I emphasize in any form. It may not be the apartheid we knew. It can manifest itself in other form and shapes if we are not careful as a nation. And I hope, remembering Dr. Hage, will keep us together as a nation at difficult times. Dear mourners, simply how can one adequately account for all the good deeds, accomplishment, and work by this icon? How? Simply how? Namibians across the political spectrum believe, and universally so, that this is a man of impeccable stature and a statement of unmatched political standing. Yes, the leader with a great measure of sensitivity and humility when handling topical and contentious matters of the state, we know. We know that. Dear mourners, how can one avoid doing an injustice to Dr. Geingob when relating and narrating his journey for over the last 60 years? With one primary aim, to achieve independence and constitutional democracy in Namibia, and to build a united and prosperous Namibian house. Simply how can one relate at this difficult occasion the challenges Dr. Hage went through without wavering in ensuring that the institution and policies of apartheid are dismantled in a reasonably short period of time from the date of independence? And this is what is important here, and more often forgotten. Geingob is the man, not a man, but the man who drove a historical and yet aggressive legislative agenda in this country, we know. Particularly between 1990 and 2002 as a prime minister and leader of government business in the National Assembly, we know that. This legislative agenda brought massive and yet beneficial socio-economic changes in our country. We know that. This should now be accepted, please. This should now be accepted by all of us, by everyone, I dare say now, so that he can have a permanent and peaceful rest. Please. Must remember, to avoid lawlessness, anarchy, and rule of law related crisis, Dr. Geingob, the chairman of the Constituent Assembly, ensured that at independence there was a temporary preservation of laws that were enforced immediately before independence, with a qualification that such laws shall remain in force until repealed or amended by an act of parliament, or until they are declared unconstitutional by competent courts. Hundreds of these bad laws, dear mourners, had since been removed from our statute books. Geingob drove this agenda as both prime minister and president. We must add this to his achievement every time we speak, every time we act as a nation. Few examples. At independence, women were treated like properties because of the discredited concept of maritime power, of and by husband over their wives. The Married Persons Equality Act was immediately and reasonably in a shorter period of time after independence. That was Geingob at work. the so-called children out of wedlock were denied certain benefit, including inheritance from their fathers. This was very, very bad. This was very, very bad, and then to show how bad it was, I want to demonstrate to you that the law as it was, inherited from our colonial masters, as regard those kids, was this. As one writer says, but those who are born of a union which is entirely odious to us, and therefore prohibited, shall not be called natural children, and no indulgence whatever shall be extended to them. But this fact shall be punishment for the fathers, that they know that children who are the issue of their sinful passion will inherit nothing. It's true. All this was dismantled under the direction of Hage Geingob. But there is another problem. These bad laws even affected women, children in relation to their mothers, because in case where a mother of two children, one legitimate or the other illegitimate, died, the illegitimate one could not inherit at Roman Dutch law, which we inherited, either through a will or as an intest heir. If the legitimate child was still alive at her death, the reason for this was for the preservation of chastity is the first duty of freedom of an illustrious woman, and because it would be unjust and very oppressive and unworthy of the spirit of our age for bastards to be acknowledged. It was bad. Under Geingob, the Child Status Act is in force, and many, many others act of parliament in protection of our children. I conclude by highlighting that it is for that reason that I say, dear Mona, that by the time Dr. Geingob completed his first term as a Prime Minister in 2002, hundreds of pieces of legislation for the benefit of Namibian people have been put into force. This area of achievement by Dr. Geingob is usually ignored and underrated. To me, it is one of the biggest achievements by him in our quest as a nation to dismantle the shameful legacy of apartheid and colonialism. Did you forget that at independence, few months before elections in 1989, our colonial masters, through an organization called Cultura 2000, siphoned thousands of millions of Namibian dollars to protect a certain section of our population. Even less than a month before independence, money was transferred to acquire property for a select race in this country. Dr. Hage Geingob directed the late Hanecom to take that issue to court. Although the government was not fully successful in the Supreme Court partially, it succeeded. So I conclude by saying it is for that reason that we must celebrate the life of a man who brought our nation very close, very, very close to the desired aspiration, and in fact closer to the status of an admired and respected constitutional democracy amongst nations of the world. Geingob leaves a prepared nation, the nation on the course to achieve prosperity for all. Geingob crafted a dynamic constitution, a living one, which not only sets out the historical bygones of yesteryears, but a supreme law guiding the nation in all aspects of our lives. As Tatembuba, assisted by Mehmet Netumbo and others, lead us going forward, we pleasantly see in them Hage. We are sure his legacy will guide them to safely steer the Namibian ship. May the soul of our Commander-in-Chief, Dr. Hage Geingob, rest in power. Thank you.